So today marks the first day of Black History Month, the start of 28 days dedicated to learning and celebrating African American culture. And this month, the NAACP is celebrating its 112th anniversary. The civil rights group was founded on February 12, 1909, 6 months after the Springfield race riot in central Illinois. The organization works to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race. So with more on this, let's bring in the organization's sitting president, CEO Derrick Johnson, who we've had the pleasure of speaking to a lot during the election season and all that sort of stuff. And so it's very good to have you here just to speak about the organization and about Black History Month. The organization, NAACP, is celebrating the 112th anniversary. This is an organization that has been a pillar within the Black community, very effective for change within the Black community. Can you tell us, because a lot of people I think at this point might not know what the NAACP did in the beginning, why it was founded, and what it's doing now?
Right. Good morning, and thank you for having me. As we recognize Black History Month, for many African Americans, we understand that Black history is 365 days of the year. As we appreciate others outside of our community, recognizing this moment. For the NAACP established, as you said earlier, 112 years ago, later this month, it was in response to a rash of denied promises in our constitutions, individuals who took up arms to ensure that this nation was protected against domestic terrorism through the Civil War and foreign occupations, whether it was the Spanish-American War, and for that fact, every war fought. But as we look forward, the organization started really honing in its responsibility to be an advocacy organization. Our first major project was anti-lynching legislation. The next major project was to advocate against the release of a movie called Birth of a Nation. And since that time, we were on the front cutting edge of dismantling segregation with Brown versus Ward decision, all the way to a Fair Housing Act legislation. It is the nation's largest and oldest civil rights organization where advocacy is not service.
So, Derrick, every year I get people either in my social media feed or who I've known who will ask me why there is a Black History Month, why it's important to celebrate a month dedicated to Black history. And sometimes people are well-meaning and they're curious and they generally want to know, and other times they're not. And you know what I mean. So I'm curious if you, or I would like for you to explain for those who are curious, why we celebrate Black history and why it's important to actually have a month dedicated to it.
Well, we live in a nation that have proactively denied the contributions of African Americans to society in general, but particularly to the development and growth of this nation. Carter G. Woodson, in his initial inception, wanted to create a moment, it was Black History Week at this time, that African Americans can learn about our history because it was not being taught in school. And over time, particularly in 1974, when we adopted it as a month, it became as much about African Americans learning about our history, but also about all of America learning about our history, whether it was inventors or individuals who fought bravely for this nation. It is important for us in this society to overcome the legacy of white supremacy by showing that African Americans and other communities contributed to perfecting our democracy, to make this nation what it is, but most importantly, to allow people to understand it's through our diversity in which we will be stronger for a better future.
So February has been officially Black History Month, I think, since the 70s, right? And I don't know about you, and I don't know about you, Vlad, but I feel like over this past year in particular, and over the summer, I've talked to more and more people that seem to lack an understanding of history. And I don't know if it's by choice, if they're deliberately avoiding some of the details, but it seems to me that one of the things that I always learned during February were the positive contributions of African Americans. And one of the things that I didn't learn was about the bigger system that they were working within, that they were fighting a machine that required them to work harder, run faster, work longer, be better to get to where they were. Do you think February, as Black History Month, is doing enough, or do you think that, I guess the question that I'm trying to, this is my frustration. It's been a long time that February has been acknowledged as African American History Month, and still a lot of people don't seem to know the history of this country. What is going on?
Well, it is a problem within our school systems across the country. We teach an abbreviated history that's oftentimes easily to debunk because it's not fact-based. It is from a perspective that reinforces negative stereotypes. There are far too many school districts that's teaching kids around Black history, and it starts with this concept of slavery and things related to slavery that simply wasn't true. We must, as a society, push back against negative stereotypes. We also must, as a society, embrace facts around the contributions, not only for African Americans, but for women, for many people who've contributed so much. Howard Zinn's book, The History of the World, showed that we all contributed to society. But what's most concerning in today's environment is the concept of facts is so distorted because of social media platforms that it's hard to get a grasp on when someone is committing treason against this nation and yet calling themselves patriots. That's how screwed we are in terms of factual information. And that's inclusive of Black history.
One of the things I think, Anne-Marie and Derrick, with regards to the question that you were asking, Anne-Marie, is, and we've talked about this, right? If you are at a dinner party, for example, and you quote a poem, let's say you quote, Robert Frost, and you say, two roads diverge in the yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled, that's made all the difference. A lot of people, if they're of a certain education level, will say to you, oh yeah, of course, I know that poem, that's Robert Frost. We all learned it in school. On the other hand, if you say to somebody, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow, people will look at you and they'll say, who's that, Vlad? And if you say Langston Hughes, people will go, oh yeah, I don't know a lot of the works by Langston Hughes. I think that's the point, right, Derrick?
Yeah. You think about the Harlem Renaissance, for example. Some of the most creative writers came during this period of time, whether it's Paul Laurence Dunbar, so many others. You look at Amanda Gorman, where we've seen so elegantly present a poem. These are things that we should have as a part of who we are as a nation. Some of the most creative writers, some of the most creative thinkers, some of the most courageous individuals who went to fight to protect our nation in World War II, only to come home to realize that they were fighting for freedoms abroad. They did not enjoy home. That was the catalyst between people like Medgar Evers to get engaged. We have to embrace all of who we are. But more importantly, this concept of a democracy and a more perfect union have consistently been challenged around the treatment of African Americans and Native Americans. And we as a community, we have forced this nation to be more perfect. Even this I Have a Dream speech, it wasn't about a dream. It was about a commitment, a social contract that had been denied. And people gathered in that moment to say, at the Bank of Justice, our check has come, returned insufficient fund. It is time to ensure that justice is truly just for all citizens, but especially for African Americans.
It's such an important message, and it just, it has always struck me as being strange that, when you, as children, as Anne-Marie pointed out, we're expected to learn certain bedrock principles, certain bedrock notions and ideals of our country and our country's history, and all that it encompasses, from art to science to medical breakthroughs, and oftentimes it's viewed through the prism generally of people who are of European descent. And when you talk to people about those of us who are of African descent, generally there's a lot of head scratching. I've had people actually, I've had people quote poems poems or works of art from people not born in this country. People, for example, quote Robert Burns, the Scottish poet, and they'll say, you know, the best laid plans of mice and men. And then when you quote Langston Hughes or when you quote W.E.B. Du Bois or somebody else, they go, I don't know who that is. So I think, you know, this is why we're having this conversation, Derrick, and it's so important.
You know what, Vlad?
Yeah.
I thought what Derrick said about, you know, what you consider a patriot was Derrick, I thought what you said about, you know, what is a patriot was such a really key thing to bring up, that the idea that questioning how far this country has come, saying that this country can live up to its ideals doesn't make you less patriotic. That's what a patriot is, wanting this country to be the best that it can be. And many, many cases, when you look at history, you're talking about African Americans who didn't have the same rights as others, who struggled harder than others, but believed that this country could live up to its ideals. That's what a patriot is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, if you think about the Civil War, it was Africans, because they were not citizens, who reinforced Sherman's army to ensure the Union stayed intact. We were not freed by Abraham Lincoln. We saved the Union to ensure that there was a United States as we know it today. And it is also about perspective of histories. We're not victims of what took place. We were actors of how we got to this place. And in that action, I love the poem, I Too Sing America, because it is in that poem, it shows that despite all of the hardship, the treatments, that we stand here as Americans. I also love our anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, as James Weldon Johnson, through that poem, really explains how we have navigated through dark times to get to this point and yet still have hope for a better America, but America that's inclusive of who we are, all of our dynamic presence, all of our creative genius, all of our sacrifice to make this a more perfect union. But yet this struggle continues.
They'll see how beautiful I am, and they will be ashamed. That poem is such a beautiful one. I encourage everybody to check it out if you can. One of the most beautiful poems by Langston Hughes. You can find out there on this Black History Month. Derrick, always great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.